Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the 2020 Virtual Annual Convention. This 45-minute session is Crisis Communications with Ketiyun Darvish Kajori and Jason Black. I'm Johnny Gayle with the National Community Action Partnership, and myself, as well as the eShow team, will be behind the scenes to ensure everything goes smoothly for you. Do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Brandon through the chat at any point during the event, and we will help troubleshoot. A few technical notes before we get started. We are recording this session to be made available to registered attendees for 30 days. If you have a question, please enter it into the chat box. If you need to reach out to me or eShow, please use the chat function. We're going to turn things over to Ketiyun and Jason in just a minute, but before we do, take a moment to answer the question in the chat box. When thinking about a crisis, what keeps you up at night? Please type your answers into the chat box.
Great, I see some folks already.
Yeah.
Jessica, Gayle.
Yeah, and Gayle's question or Gayle's statement is like, you nailed it. Too much to do and too few staff to do it. Yeah.
Great. Keeping people safe. Self-harm, housing, safety, process, getting it all done. With my daughter going to school shortly, that's all I can think about is how am I going to get it all done? Funding, reaching the folks that are needed. Great.
Rachel's comment there, no formal process for managing. That's a big part of our conversation, I think.
Yeah, resources, what goes first. This is great.
Yeah.
Keep putting it in. We're going to scroll through here. And we're also going to get started. So as Johnny mentioned, this session is about crisis communications. So this is like on the airplane when people used to fly, when they would say, if you're going to Denver, stay on board. If you're going anywhere else, get off the plane. So which happened to me once. I was not going to Denver and I had to get off the plane.
Oh, no.
I'm Ketiyun, and I am a consultant in communications. I've worked with the Community Action Partnership for a number of years on a number of things, from messaging to capturing and documenting the results that you all have. And I've done a lot of training. And I'm super excited that my partner in crime today is...
Hi, Jason Black. I'm with the Community Renewal Team in Hartford. I've been with the agency for a little more than 3 years now. But my skill set with marketing communications goes back 25 plus years. I won't bore you with that, but the time at CRT alone has been very, very valuable. And certainly the past 6 months, right, in terms of crisis communications, I think are very apt conversation that we'll be able to have today.
So again, thank you all who have been putting things in the chat. I'm actually looking and scrolling through it right now. Hello from North Dakota. Hello from California. I saw hello from Carson City, Nevada.
Or did you see Ria's comment there? Ria Woods. We're in the midst of the hurricane while dealing with the pandemic.
Oh gosh. And Jason, you're in Connecticut, and I'm in DC. So, you know, when thinking about a crisis, one of the things that we wanted to, in Montana and Washington, Maui. Oh, Maui, can you invite me to come? I'll do anything for free.
And anyway. I'll carry your suitcase. So.
Okay. You know, one of the things that I wanted to note is, you know, we're all in the middle of a crisis right now, right? And that crisis is COVID. And a lot of times when I've done a lot of work on crisis communications and training, and you know, for many of us, there are many ways that our agencies can be facing crises, right? And some of those are financial, could be, right? Some of those are reputational, right? Like what happens when staff may speak to the media or to through social media expressing values that don't represent you and your work. You know, we've seen things around sexual harassment and racial justice and sexual abuse. So I've actually worked with a number of agencies that have gone through a variety of crises, and all of those things are the reason why that we would always recommend that communications folks think carefully about how to put together sort of a response to crisis and sort of pull together the right team to be able to respond. And again, as I noted at the beginning here, I think for all of us, COVID in and of itself brings many potential crises, right? From health to financial, from closing agencies, from staff issues, from housing issues. And so it's a time, even though we're in the midst of a crisis, to really think about what does that next phase look like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, typically when we talk about crisis planning, I typically talk about three things: about sort of preparation, about planning, and about putting things into action. And when we started to put together this session and talking to Jason, I thought, Jason, one of the things that you said to me is like, we're in the middle of a crisis, but we're actually getting ready for phase 2 of a crisis. Mm. And so while we're putting everything into action right now, we're actually having to plan and prepare for phase 2, right?
Absolutely. And I guess, as hard as these past 6 months have been for so many of us, certainly, anyone who works in community action will perfectly understand that. We're fortunate in that we can take the experiences that we have had from these past 6 months, reflect on those briefly, right? And begin to think about the preparations and the planning for what is to come with what inevitably, what the experts are telling us is going to be phase 2 with COVID. Yeah. And then being prepared to put that into action when the time comes. Right, benefit from the experiences that we've all just gone through, and count our blessings, right, that we're here today to be able to do this together, and say how do we take what we just had happen to all of us collectively and at our local level, and how can we apply that in meaningful, useful ways, productive ways going forward.
Yeah, so even though we are in some ways, we're in stage 3 of crisis planning, we're actually putting crisis response into action. Mm-hmm. It's not too late to do some of the preparation work for phase 2 or for other things that are happening within our agencies. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to prepare for a crisis as a communications person or team. How do you want to think about preparing for a crisis? And so even though here I'm saying before a crisis hits, I think in the time of COVID, I mean, before phase 2 hits, but also, COVID isn't the only crisis we're going to be facing over I hate to say that, right? But sometimes for those of you, for example, where the hurricane is hitting right now, sadly, those communities are in the midst of this COVID crisis, and they're going to be in a disaster response mode with regard to that hurricane. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that's really important is to be thinking acutely about COVID, but the broader set of things that you all would be planning for. And so, there's sort of 3 parts to that preparation, which is about monitoring your risk, minimizing to the extent that's possible your risk, and maximizing supporters so that they're there when the time comes and you need folks to be your champions, that they're available to you. So just really quickly, I want to say, and sometimes this is, again, disaster related or not disaster related, but monitor risk. In a communication sense, what that means is, what are the systems you're putting in place to monitor any of the chatter that's happening about your agency? Are you tracking things in social media? Do you have a media monitoring system in place? Are you, like Jason, you and I were talking about the fact that, a few months ago, you all had to close down your childcare center and then reopen it. And I know one of the questions I asked you was, I'm sure the parents who had children in your center, like social media would be a place, right, where a lot of that chatter would be happening. So
that's right. And it was a perfect opportunity for that. And for clarity, the closure was due to the fact that parents, families at the time just weren't feeling the comfort level that they needed to have kids away from them all day, right? So they kept their kids at home, and we understand that, and we recognize that. We've been lucky in that with our 3 preschool programs, set locations in Hartford, they reopened a little more than a month ago now, and the number of precautions that have been taken to make sure that the facilities are good to go from the perspective of the staff, the personnel, of course, right, protect everybody there, but also for the children and the families and make sure that they're going to be safe. It is amazing, coupled with the fact that they've actually now created a distance learning opportunity for those kids, something that we never would have anticipated before.
Yeah.
Right. And that's in place now for families who, again, for one reason or another, they're not comfortable coming to the physical location, but we can still offer them something. But to your point, Ketune, social media was a huge help during the past summer months. And it was interesting. Our director for our early care and education program, she was doing twice a week during the summer story time on Facebook. We use Facebook Live. And she would read storybooks for families and kids, and they were such a huge hit. We have recordings of those up on our Facebook page. If people want to see them later, they're adorable.
Yeah. And so, and I know Jason's mentioned to me too, is that, you have a media system that you use.
Right. We've got a really good tool, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who's on the call. If you don't have a media monitoring tool now, it's called TV Eyes, like your eyeball. They're out of Stanford, I think. You can look them up on the interwebs. TV Eyes, we pay them roughly $100 a month for the media monitoring, and that covers all of the major TV in our area, and it also covers most of the radio in our area, like certainly the talk radio gets covered, and I can do very specific keyword searches. So on, CRT, Community Renewal Team, the names of our executives, and anytime something comes up on one of those channels, and usually I know in advance, right? Because if I'm doing my job right, I know when the media is coming. But just in case, that tool, because it's live monitoring what's happening, I'm getting alerts in my email within like a minute or two of the mentions on air. TV Eyes, Rachel, that's correct. TV Eyes is exactly the name. Google Alerts, Lauren is mentioning, that's a very good way to go about doing it as well. And I can do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Google Alerts, Lauren, thank you for mentioning that. It is, Rachel wrote it out. So TV Eyes, EYES.
And I'm just going to grab the URL while we're talking, and I'll put that in as well for people.
Terrific. Yeah. Google Alerts is another way. If you can do paid media monitoring, if any of you use any tools to run your social media, you can also do monitoring through social media. And one thing that I wanted to say that Jason mentioned, which is, if you heard what he said he does the name of his agency, he does keywords related to the work that they do, and he does executives of the community renewal team. Sometimes, right, depending on your industry, you might also do monitoring that includes what I would nonprofits hate it when I say competitors, but I would say your collaborators, like other groups that are in the news, that you want to sort of just stay on top of how they're, any of the reputational things that are happening with them, and also any detractors that you have. So I know in some cases we may have a state representative, or we may have a member of the county council who is the sort of naysayer or the critic. And so I always monitor those people as well, so that I can see that chatter. So the monitoring risk is super important. Very quickly about minimizing risk, typically, and I will just say, I'm a communicator, I'm not a lawyer. So for all of this around crisis, I think just keep in mind that there are also some legal requirements that you want to be thinking about. But minimizing risk is all about, have you done audits? Are you following your financial guidelines? Are you following all your safety protocols around COVID? Are you following any protocols you have around safety with children and child abuse reporting and background checks? So you minimize your risk by doing all the good things that I know you all are doing and following all those protocols. And then maximizing supporters is all about, when you imagine a crisis hitting, right? Whether it's something, like let's say you had to close down a program because of COVID, or there was a financial mispropriety, or there were some layoffs that had to happen, or whatever the crisis is, or there was a sexual abuse crisis. Who are those folks within your community that you really need to stand up and vouch for you? And one of the things to be doing on a constant basis leading up to your crisis is really is really kind of maximizing those relationships so that you can call on them when you need them. Okay, somebody asked about inappropriate social media.
I'd be happy to answer that question that Lauren just posted. So she's asking what to do about employees that make inappropriate comments on their personal social media pages. They work for you, right? You can ask them to take it down. We have done that before. We've had to in a couple of occasions. You don't want to, interfere that way if you don't have to. But again, they are a representative of the agency, and they could inadvertently create a bigger problem for you. We actually had something kind of like that this spring, pre-COVID. Somebody happened to see something that they took a picture of. They thought it was amusing. It really was inappropriate. And that one photo went viral that day. It took off in a hurry. And the person who put it out there, again, didn't mean harm, we assume. But because that person was clearly someone who works for the agency in the way that person identified themselves on their social media profile, but we pulled aside and said, please, you got to take it down.
And I just want to point out, in terms of minimizing risk around social media, for every single one of you, every single one of our agencies should have a social media policy that all the staff is part of your employee handbook or your manual, and that all the staff get trained on whenever you do regular trainings on policies and procedures. That one thing that you can, even though folks say, oh, that's my freedom of speech, that one thing that you can absolutely say is that our social media policy requires your public statements to reflect the values of our organization. And by that we mean that our organization doesn't discriminate on these basis. We support the human rights of all people and racial justice. Whatever the values are that you have, the organization has a value statement, and you can clearly say to everyone, when you speak publicly, we require all of our staff to uphold the values of our organization. So that's one thing. You can also require all of your employees to include in their bio on their social media channels that they're speaking from their, these do not represent the positions of my employer. So you can absolutely do that. And then one thing to, I think, keep in mind for all of our agencies, especially the more senior level you are, is that there is no distinction anymore between public and private, especially for senior level people at organizations. And so even if they have said, I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, and even if they are saying that this is my private channel, their private statements will be public. And so there's a much, lower tolerance for speaking privately for senior level executives.
Right. Katrina, you see that one comment from Lindy making the statement again about the wording, and it looks like Lauren has started to say it there. We require your public statements to reflect the values of your organization. I think that's a succinct way of putting it. And
yeah.
I don't want to add to that at all.
So I, again, you can, I would just encourage every single one of our agencies to have a social media policy. Mm-hmm. And to talk to. So that's a way of mitigating risk, right? It doesn't stop all of that happening.
Mm-hmm. Can I just touch briefly on Renee's question right there?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Negative comments on social media.
Yeah. And do we address them or ignore them? I address them. I try to take them offline, so to speak. I try to private message that person first if I can, and find out what's going on and see if there's a way to rectify the situation if we can. And then if I'm not getting anywhere, if it's your channel, you own it. You can block that comment or you can delete that comment. That's you're entitled, right? That's you own that.
Unless you're a government agency.
Fair enough. But for the community action agencies who are with us today, right? If you're on Facebook, if you're active on Facebook, like CRT is occasionally, right? We're going to get comments that maybe aren't as flattering as we would have liked. I will do what I can to try to pull that conversation aside, figure out what's going on, figure out why they've said the things that they have, and see if we can turn it around. But don't ignore it. That's my point. Don't ignore it.
And I would just say this, I'm probably, so there's another rule of thumb, which is don't feed the trolls. And so one of the things that's really important when you think about negative comments are the comments made in sort of a way of trying to engage around a topic, or the comments being made as a way of promoting a very specific political point of view that is derogatory. So I just wanted to put a little asterisk on responding to those comments to say, if it's a comment from a parent or a council member or a teacher or someone who interacts with your program and has had a negative experience, or is concerned about an action that one of your agencies has taken, and they make that comment, then absolutely reach out to that person. Try not to have a public conversation about it online. Reach out to that person, like Jason was saying, and just say, hey, I saw your comment and I wanted to see if you wanted to have an opportunity to talk about it. Sometimes people really don't want an opportunity to talk about it, and they just wanted to air their grievance, and that happened. You can mute that comment, as Jason said, or you can block that person. Sometimes people really are just wanting to promote a point of view that people in poverty, for example, shouldn't have any assistance, or racist ideologies, or what have you. You don't have any obligation to engage with those folks. And in those cases where it's really not about trying to respond to work that you're doing, but trying to promote an ideology or a value that your organization doesn't hold, I think it's perfectly acceptable to block that person and kind of move on, right?
Agreed.
So let's
to Cheryl's point there really briefly, if the comments are coming to you via Messenger instead of through the main page, even better, right? Because then you can have that conversation privately. That's perfect. Yeah,
that's great.
Okay.
So let's talk about what a plan might look like. Okay, so one of the things early on when we said what keeps you up at night, and a number of you said, I just don't know where to get started. I'm overwhelmed. I'm worried about the process. There's too much to do and not enough to address it. The point of planning is to try and get some of that off your plate for when you're in the midst of a crisis, right? So crisis plan. So again, you can think about this as you're looking ahead to over the next year. What is it that you might face as an organization, and how can you put some of the policies and procedures you're going to follow into writing? Okay, so a crisis plan, and by the way, I should say all of these slides are available in the handout section here, which I think you can download from there. And I assume all of the materials for this conference are available somewhere else. So maybe Johnny will jump on later and clarify. But this is a good outline for your crisis plan. So, your crisis plan will typically involve all of these things. And we're going to go through these kind of one by one, keeping track of the time here. So first of all, there's Johnny. All slides and materials are available through the event app and will be loaded to the website as well. There you go. So you can download that and use that as your outline. So typically in a crisis plan, you're going to kind of identify 5 to 10 scenarios that are crises that represent the greatest risk to you as an organization that would need a communications response, right? And typically, like right now, obviously, COVID is one really important thing to add. And within COVID, there are many crises that could happen, right? What if we have to close programs? What if we lose our funding because state and community funding has been taken towards their own crisis response and we're not going to get as much funding? And we have to shut programs or lay off staff? What if there is a spread because we weren't following protocols, et cetera, et cetera? So COVID in and of itself has some particular scenarios that could happen that you're mitigating and trying to avoid, but could happen. But there are also some other things. What if there's a disaster in our community and we need to, and the entire organization has to shut down for a while? What if there is a financial issue? What if there's sexual abuse? So, each of you knows sort of the areas where there may be risk. Those are some of the things that I've seen. I've seen CEO transitions. I've seen sexual harassment. I've seen, I'm trying to think, am I missing anything, Jason? What am I missing?
So I guess I also tend to think of it, Katiun, from the perspective of what is the crisis to the community itself. Right now, it's maybe not directly our problem as an agency, but it's affecting the people that we serve each and every day and the families that we serve, right? And so, for instance, the financial fallout, if you will, from COVID, the fact that so many people have been out of work and people don't know what is going to be happening going forward because we don't know if or when there's going to be another relief package from the federal government, for instance.
Right? Strain and stress on your agency, right?
Strain and stress on the agency, on the employees of the agency, and huge strain and stress on the people that we're supposed to be serving and helping on a daily basis. Yeah.
So just, again, sort of identify those things. I think you want to also identify who is your crisis team. So a crisis team needs to be small enough that it is nimble, that you can reach folks quickly and you can pull them together for decision making. But it also needs to have authority and it needs to have information. So typically, a crisis team would involve any key decision makers for your agency. So that would be your CEO or your board chair, the people with the facts. So that would be the program director or the housing director or the preschool director or the Head Start director, whomever, and your communications person. And then to the extent, a legal person, right? And I think, Jason, we were talking about, and that sounds exactly like who you guys have in your agency.
Yeah, we're fortunate in that there's a good chain of command. It's a tight chain of command, if you will, for this type of need, where our CEO would obviously be involved first and foremost. She probably would involve the board chair, at least from her own one-on-one conversations with him to make sure he's aware of what's happening before the full board is communicated to. I would be involved in those conversations. My boss would likely be involved in those conversations, as well as whoever the key decision maker at the program level that needs to be involved. And as we're then putting any messaging together for what we plan to say or be prepared to say, right? Sometimes we don't want to talk about it, let's be honest. But before that happens, then any legal review with counsel would happen as well.
And then you have to also decide as part of that how you're going to communicate and contact those folks, right?
That's right. Yes.
If your server goes down, are you going to set up a WhatsApp group? Are you going to use just a texting chain? So you're going to have all those contact details. The other thing I wanted to just mention, it's super helpful to develop what I call holding messages, actually what people call holding messages, for each scenario you have identified. So, and these whole, so for each of these things that we talked about, that could be something where you would have to respond really quickly. Just put together some holding messages and you can see some of these here, that communicate your values, right? So one of the things I wanted to say is your values, the fact that you are, keeping people safe, wanting to be transparent, serving the best interests of the community. Like, these are all values that all of you hold. And you want to kind of, sometimes in a crisis, we can just respond by putting out information or sort of deny or say, we don't have any information to share yet. We're going to have to look into it. You want to kind of slow down in your plan and just at least put together some holding messages that you can update with facts that really reflect your values. And that's super important.
And Katiun, can I just interject for a second here? There's nothing wrong with saying to a reporter who calls you out of the blue and says, what about XYZ? And you have no idea what they're talking about or why it might be a problem. But you know that they're like, it's urgent for them. And your first reaction normally is, I'll tell you whatever I can, right? But there is no harm in you saying, you know what? I don't have the right answer for that right now. I'm going to look into it and I'm going to get back to you.
Yeah.
And make them wait. And don't be pressured to answer on the spot if you are not comfortable giving that answer. you control that conversation at that point. And if the reporter is worth their salt, right, they will respect that, and you will have done your job by defending the agency and your employer.
Yeah. Rachel gives you an amen to that.
Thank you, Rachel.
You want to sort of in your plan identify your monitoring system, right? So how you're going to track all these things. We talked about some of the mechanisms for tracking earlier, but clearly you want to make sure that you're tracking any coverage or chatter that's happening around the particular crisis, and that someone, not only that you're tracking it, but someone's actually looking at the results of that tracking and actually identifying places where you may or may not want to respond, including emails coming in from donors, et cetera. All of that should come to the crisis team because it's all part of the same issue.
Agreed.
You also want to identify very clearly who the champions are. So we talked about cultivating champions. So for each of these scenarios, who's your best spokesperson and who's the best validator in the community to really deliver your message? Those are all really important things.
And that's often a very short list.
It's often a very short list. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about rapid response. So I want to just get us quickly through there. So you want to really identify how you're going to respond, who's going to get the phone calls, who's going to get emails, which media outlets you're going to turn to, and what's going to happen with social media, right? And so for each of your audiences, it's going to be very important to figure out who are the high touch points, who need phone calls immediately, and who will get emails, and then how are we going to communicate with the vast number of the people in our community who are not going to get an email or a phone call, right?
Right. Sorry, I was a little distracted by a couple of chat pieces that came in there, but people are making some really good points that I want to make sure that we respond to.
That's great. Yeah. So I see Sue saying that staff can also be part of a monitoring system. Absolutely. And
it's great if they can, right? Because more eyes, right, on a situation, on a problem, oftentimes can be helpful, right? And particularly if it's something where you, for whatever reason, you might have missed it. If somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, did you see this thing in the paper?" Or did you hear that story on the radio this morning? And you think, nope, I missed that one, right? But then you can at least circle back and you can figure out what that is. No, it's a very good point from Sue. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would just say one of the things when we talked about your crisis team, one person I didn't mention that sometimes people add is sometimes there's a truth teller, or sometimes they call them the Yoda or the guru, to add to your crisis team, right? So that's the person, even though maybe they're not directly involved with the program and they don't have decision-making authority or they don't have a legal role, who kind of is the great, has that gut feeling about how people will react. And so sometimes that can be a staff member, sometimes that can be a certain board member that's really familiar with many of the people in your programs. But I think having that kind of truth teller is often really important, because sometimes, you're just not aware of your blind spots. And those folks are really good about raising up things that you may be in a blind spot.
Right. And at CRT, we certainly have that. I know Lena, our CEO, when she has questions, there is a key board member that she will call oftentimes just for one more point of view and to, try to, bounce it around, make sure that our reaction makes sense and is correct. And he often provides very, very good guidance.
Great. That's terrific.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the actual response. So we have about 10, 12 minutes left. And I'm just going to want this sort of my reminder to all of us that if you have questions, some of you have been putting it in the chat, any questions and comments, if you want to put them in the chat, since we can't open up the lines and hear from all of you, please feel free, and we'll definitely be paying attention to that and answer along the way. So,
can I just go back to a couple of the early questions from the beginning?
Yeah.
Right? So, and forgive me, I don't have the names in front of me of the people who asked them. It's one person had posed, no formalized process of how to manage crisis communications. Well, here we are, right? None of us in COVID world back in February, March, let's not say not, very few of us had a crisis plan for a pandemic, right? Unless you work in insurance or in theory, the federal government, you probably didn't have pandemic planning document sitting in a file cabinet somewhere. But we've lived through these past 6 months, and we are here looking at what is, again, as we said earlier, likely to be phase 2, right? What does that tell us? What can we do? What are the things that we can prepare? If you go back to the early part of Ketiyun's outline that she helped to share, those are, and it doesn't have to be, a phone book worth of information, right? Put it at a high level, right? Bullet points or checklist, right? Something actionable that you can hold on to and you can have with you when you need it, on a case-by-case basis where you can is good, or if it's better for you to have it at at the high level. Here is COVID phase 2 and what our agency needs to do to be able to respond to that. Having it now will save you so much time and trouble in the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, great. And thank you for those of you who've said this is useful. We're glad it's useful. I'm so happy. That's good. That's good.
One of the other questions that came in early that I thought was interesting is, will all the progress we've made become lost? Right? And what a tough question, but so interesting to think about, right? Let's hope that that's not the case, right? Let's hope that as a result of the crisis that we have all lived through for the past 6 months, that doesn't then take all of the good work that our agencies have been doing for the past many, many years. CRT has been in place for over 55 years, right? We'd hate to think that the work that we've been doing, helping families, helping individuals in their local communities, would be at a loss because of what is happening now. And it's a genuine fear. But again, this is the opportunity, right, to put a plan in place and to be in a position to be proactive, right? If and when the time comes. And in many cases, this isn't a matter of if, it is a when.
Yeah. I wanted to just note that somebody mentioned not to forget the staff and how important they are to both communicate to and to engage in this process. And I just want to say right on to that, because your staff are going to be the ones, especially depending on your size of your agency, they're the ones that are going to be out there being asked questions about what's going on, and they're going to need to be able to answer in a way that kind of supports what the organization is trying to achieve through the communications around that crisis.
Right.
I wanted to really quickly get through these last slides because I know we only have a few minutes, and I just want to make sure that folks are ready. Like if they have any last things about how do I respond, I just wanted to quickly say the number one question you should be asking yourself is this actually a crisis, right? So there can be something that's a nuisance, like a bad comment on Facebook, for example. But is that a reason to pull together your entire crisis team and get all the wheels into motion? No, right? If something happens, and Jason, I was thinking about the example you gave me about your food truck. Like there are bad things that can happen that are actually not necessarily a crisis. So I don't know if you want to share that example.
Yeah, just briefly. So one of the bigger programs that CRT runs in Central Connecticut is Meals on Wheels for medically homebound seniors. And this was early on in COVID world, at the end of March, one of our trucks in our fleet got into a really bad accident. The truck was a wreck. The driver, thankfully, was fine. Very lucky that the driver was not hurt, but the truck is totaled. The truck needs to be replaced to keep the fleet at full capacity. But at that point, again, end of March, beginning of April, as we're starting to talk about this and think about it, here in Connecticut, COVID was full blown, right? Or blowing up, shall we say. And people were losing jobs left and right, and businesses were shutting down, and everybody was in sort of panic mode. And our question to ourselves was, can we legitimately go ask people for money right now and to buy a new truck? Right. And the answer was, well, let's try. Let's see what happens. And so we did. We put the request out there to folks and we said, we hate to ask, right? We know this is the worst possible time to be asking anyone for money, given how bad things are all around us and how many problems people really have. But if you're in a position to be supportive in whatever way and help us replace this truck, we of course will be forever grateful, and our program will be grateful. And it blew our minds, but the community came back and did it, and the money came in, and we were by midsummer we've had enough money to purchase a new truck. The truck is on order. blew my mind. I never expected that would
I love
happen.
that example because, like, in some cases, right, that could have really been a crisis. There could have been a lot of questions in the community where people were saying, at a time like this, with resources so scarce, what happened that they crashed a truck, right? Like, there could have been a lot of questions about the circumstances of
Sure.
that and how it got totaled. But instead, you all took a look at that and thought, we're going to be transparent. We're going to actually amplify the fact that